the way that it was pitched to me was as a female empowerment group.
While you were in DAS, and I know this is a difficult question,
Yeah.
were you sexually abused?
Yes, I was.
Se trata de una de las sectas más peligrosas de todo el mundo.
En el año 2017, el diario The New York Times comenzó a investigar una organización llamada NXIVM. La misma se presentaba como una compañía que ofrecía cursos de desarrollo personal, pero esa resultó ser tan solo la fachada de una estructura multinivel que sometía a sus miembros a las torturas más grandes.
For charges including racketeering, sex trafficking, and forced labor.
Abuso sexual, tráfico humano y marcas de hierro hirviendo sobre la piel. Todo esto ocurría en el corazón de Estados Unidos. Keith Raniere, el líder de la llamada secta sexual, reclutaba a mujeres de todas partes del país. Una de sus cómplices, la actriz Allison Mack, lo ayudaba en este trabajo, mientras seleccionaba miembros de NXIVM para incorporarlas en un subgrupo cerrado en el cual las esclavizaba y las obligaba a cumplir con los deseos sexuales del líder.
Smallville actress Allison Mack is pleading guilty.
En este video entrevisté a Isabel Oxenberg, una chica de Los Ángeles que formó parte de este culto sexual desde 2011 hasta 2018, para luego convertirse en una testigo clave en la investigación del FBI que ayudó a desenmascarar la verdad. India, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm
Thank
good.
you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I want to thank you for real for doing this interview because your case is very famous, so I really appreciate that you take time out of your life to do this interview.
Thank you. It's not always easy to talk about this stuff, but I feel like when people reach out and they have like an interesting platform or they're already just personally interested in these types of topics, it does help me to process and talk these things out with different people. Strangely, sometimes I leave an interview and I feel like really tired, or sometimes I'll feel really like reinvigorated, like, wow, that really just like helped me to understand something deeper. So I appreciate them too.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
First off, my name is India Oxenberg. I grew up in Los Angeles area most of my life. I am now a writer and a producer, but I went through a very strange experience in my 20s that actually lasted about 7 years. Okay. And that experience has been come to know, in the media as NXIVM. And NXIVM really is just a cult that pretty much made themselves out to be a legitimate business that was trying to sell things to people. So when I was 19 years old, I had just left university, and a trusted friend of my mom's and myself invited us to an intro presentation in Santa Monica, California, which is not really that far from where I grew up. And so we decided to go. At the time, I was feeling really lost. I was like 19, had just left school. I was like, what am I going to do with my life? Like,
we've all been there.
I feel like it's so funny when I look back at myself at 19. It's like as if I thought that I had to have it all together, and I was just so far from that it makes me laugh. Like, I have a sister that's 19, and I see her stressing about certain things in her life, and I'm like, oh my God, I was really putting a lot of pressure. But anyways, I was 19 years old. I wanted to start my own company in catering with one of my best friends from high school. And so my mom thought, like, well, maybe this will help her. Like, maybe this will help both of us to kind of have some skills and spend some time together. So I ended up saying yes to this intro presentation, which ended up being a series of courses that I signed up with my mom as a student. Okay. From then, cut to a year in of taking these classes as a student, I end up becoming a coach in the organization. So I came from this very, relatively normal life. I mean, my parents have unusual jobs, but I feel like I had, a blended family, but like a lot of love.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't looking for necessarily like repairing my relationship. I was looking more for like improving the bond that I had with my mom as an adult. Okay. Like, oh, we can get to know each other better. It wasn't like it was messed up or anything, but I ended up going down this coaching path for several years, actually about 5 years, until I was recruited into a subgroup, which later was known as DOS.
How would you define DOS? What was it?
That's a good question, because I feel like there's how it was pitched to me and defined to me versus what it was really, a very high control way of basically taking people and making them servants or slaves to Keith Raniere. So the way that it was pitched to me was as a female empowerment group, which was going to be a place where other women were going to be coaching me and pushing me to be stronger and more capable. And the one primary person who invited me to the group was Allison Mack. Mm-hmm. She was someone that I didn't really know that well, but I admired her a lot in the community of NXIVM. She was growing very fast, and she was advancing, and she was, earning all these things that I was trying to do, but I wasn't capable. What I thought DOS was when I joined was a women's coaching group. What it was actually a trap to enslave other women for Keith Raniere's goals in the future, which were really about power and control and political control, and also controlling people's assets and what they could do with their lives so that they could just support him.
How did they control you?
Through blackmail. So what they did was they had us collateralized, which meant that they were going to collect damaging information on not just me, but the other women in the group, so that we could never leave or we could never talk about it. And the way that they proposed that to us was that this was going to be helpful for us, that this was going to be the way that we were not going to run away when things got hard. And so in theory, I can see how I could make sense of that at the time. But now, like, when I look at it now, it's so clearly a red flag of like danger, danger, danger. Why would anybody need damaging information about you?
Basically, they force you to give them information about yourself, and then they use that information against you, so you cannot leave. So you couldn't leave.
Correct. But it's a little bit more subtle. Like it's not like, if you leave, I'm going to like show everybody these damaging videos and photos of you. You're not hearing that on a daily basis. You're hearing that in the background, if that makes sense. Like, collateral is due. Collateral is due every month. You need to make the collateral more damaging. If you ever leave, the collateral will be released. It's all like theoretical until they actually needed to be aggressive with someone. And then I witnessed that too, where they were very aggressive with one woman who was trying to leave, and they were threatening to release her collateral.
What did they force you to do while you were in DOS?
Well, they had a lot of rules with DOS. One of them had to do with restricted eating. Another had to do with just penances in general. And we talk a lot about that in the series, like what the different penances were, because sometimes they were more psychological. They weren't always physical punishment. Getting you to do things if somebody else was not doing something. Like, for instance, I would be punished if somebody else wasn't delivering what they were being told to deliver to Allison, for instance. Like, if she missed her collateral, I would get punished. So there was a lot of ways that they used people depending on what affected them. And for me, I'm very affected by people's emotions. Like, I don't want somebody to be upset with me. I didn't want my friend to suffer. So I would really respond if Allison was going to say, your friend, who is not my friend anymore, sadly, but my friend Michelle is not going to be able to eat if you do not do this requirement for DOS.
While you were in DOS, and I know this is a difficult question, were you sexually abused?
I was, and I do talk about that in the series at length, because I was being told that the abuse that I was having was not abuse. And so that's very confusing for someone who's going through something at the time, believing that you deserve it or that you need it. It's a very unfortunately common thing that a lot of survivors of sexual abuse experience, is that kind of confusion of what happened to me. Because, it's so easy. I mean, it's so much easier than I thought to just change people's way of thinking. And I think that's part of why I wanted to talk so much about NXIVM and about indoctrination and coercion, because you don't need to be in a cult to be coerced. You can be coerced in a toxic work environment. You can be coerced in school. You can be coerced in your family. Like coercion exists and manipulation exists, and if you're able to identify it, then my hope was that other people could avoid it and they wouldn't have to go through what I went through.
Were you feeling vulnerable when you were recruited to it?
Yes, and that's a really good point, because I was vulnerable. I wasn't just feeling it. I was vulnerable because I was allowing my life to be changed in a matter of a decision that I wasn't even aware of what that decision was fully going to be, which ended up being DOS. And so, like, I was vulnerable to their lies and I was vulnerable to their manipulation, but I was also personally very, like, depleted at that time because I wanted to improve myself, but from a desperate place.
Who is Keith Raniere?
Keith Raniere, he started NXIVM and ESP with Nancy Salzman. And he is a convicted felon, and he is a trafficker of human beings, and he is also an abuser of human beings. And he is now in prison for 120 years, which is like a big statement, because it says a lot about your crimes when you get a sentence that is that. My opinions changed about him so much. Like, in the very beginning, when I was a student, I didn't really think about Keith. Then as I was in NXIVM and I was a coach, my feelings about him started to change because of the way that they spoke about him, that he was the smartest man in the world, that he was a humanitarian, that he spent all of his time thinking about how to help people. And so I really believed that he was a good person. And I thought he was my friend. Like, for a long time, I thought that he was a friend of mine until I started to realize, like, the real truths of how he lived his life.
You were saying before, while you were in DAS, you were branded.
Correct.
So when that happened, what did they tell you that was?
They told us that it was more of a commitment ceremony, like a way for us to pledge our loyalty to DOS. And to also rise above a lot of pain, like to experience a lot of pain for something that you really care about. That was what they told us. We did not know that they were Keith Raniere's initials. I actually thought it was a symbol of the elements for a very long time. I believed that, and I was very embarrassed to, like, admit that I believed that, but that was what I was told that they were.
Do you still have that brand?
I do, but I changed it.
How did you change it?
I tattooed it.
Really?
So, yeah, I did. I was so unhappy with the brand when I found out what it was. I was just, like, so grossed out. I felt like, I didn't want to look at myself naked. I just was thinking about that all the time. So I designed a tattoo that would cover the whole brand, and it is a evil eye with a mandala around it. Okay. And then on the inside it says Impara, which means still learning.
While you were in DAS, did you invite someone to join?
I did, and that was a part of the program. It was a big part of it, actually. I was trained to recruit from the time that I became a coach. And ESP was all about selling executive success programs. Like, that was the thing that they were selling. But what I didn't realize was when you became a coach and you got closer and closer to rising up the ranks, that meant that you had to recruit more people and you were making money off of those people who you were recruiting. That I never had. I never got there. Thank God, actually, because I feel like I'm better off that I didn't. The thing that I still feel, obviously, a lot of guilt around is the fact that I brought in friends to DOS when I believed that DOS was a good thing.
When did you realize that DOS wasn't what you thought it was?
Way too late. I mean, so it took me a long time to be feeling okay to question those things, because I was so scared and I was so attached to this being good and this being a good thing that I chose, that to question all of that was very destabilizing for myself.
Did someone ever try to help you to get out of it? Like your mother, your friends?
2017, when the story was in the New York Times, and when my mom started bringing a lot of attention to the media, that was her way of trying to get me to see that what was going on in NXIVM was bad. And I was still very much blind to that because I was still living in Albany with most of those people. So when I say it took a long time, it did take a long time. It took like a little bit more than a year for me to just realize, like, what the fuck is happening here is not good. And I wish that it was sooner, but it wasn't.
How did you feel when everything started to like blow up?
I felt like my life was falling apart and that I felt so exposed and really embarrassed, more afraid, but like paralyzed in it. Like I wasn't at the point where I was feeling a lot of fear about what was going on. I was still kind of in shock. Like when Keith was arrested, when Allison was arrested, and the other co-defendants, I was in New York City and I was thinking, what's going to happen to me? Like, am I going to be arrested? Like, I just didn't know what I was really up against. And so it was scary for me, and it took me a while to feel safe enough to be able to talk to anybody about it. And then when I felt okay to just like start to share, then I began to work with the FBI, and I became a cooperating witness for about 9 months, and that took a lot of my time.
At some point you gave them information about yourself, and I'm assuming that information is still there somewhere. I mean, I don't know if Keith has it or anyone else. I don't know.
I don't think Keith has it because he's in a maximum security prison, so that would be very difficult for him to get. But I do know that there are copies because it's the internet and it's digital, and I know that probably Nikki Klein has copies, or her lawyer has copies of all of our collateral, not just mine. And so it certainly makes me feel afraid sometimes, but I don't choose to live every day afraid, because there's nothing that they can really do that can hurt me. And that's what I had to like sink into my mind very deeply, that even if they decided to put anything out there, like a nude photograph, of course it would be embarrassing and I would feel upset, but I'm not going to break because of that. Like, I'm not going to fall apart. My life is not going to fall apart.
How is your life now?
You know, my life is really good. I have a wonderful fiance who is a great partner for me. I have my family nearby. I'm living back in Los Angeles. I definitely have hard days still. Like, I definitely do. But mostly I feel much more just grateful for my life, that I don't care about some of the little things that haunt me or bother me, because it's like, okay, yeah, that happened. That was the past. But I feel very hopeful for my future. And I'm really excited to just like have a normal life and work and travel and explore and all the things that I like to do that I really lost for a couple years.
What advice would you give to someone who is right now in the position you were when you were 19? I mean, you find this place that apparently has all the answers that you were looking for, and...
Oh, that's what I would say. I'd say there's no thing or nobody that has all the answers. I think that if you're looking for that, it's okay, because a lot of people look for answers. I still look for answers, but it's more important to have those answers come from you and people that you trust, who are like loyal to your life and support you and your dreams. Those are the types of people that you want to surround yourself with, because if you're feeling lost and vulnerable, the people who are manipulative are going to notice that.
Does NXIVM still exist?
Yeah.
So how is that possible?
And I don't really know. I don't understand, because I've distanced myself from a lot of those people who are still loyal to Keith, because that's not healthy for me. I think there's people who really still believe, and it makes me sad, actually, because they don't have their lives to themselves again. These are people who are still very, very loyal to a man who doesn't really deserve their loyalty, in my opinion.
Is there anything else you would like to say? This is your moment to speak to all the Latin America audience.
This is my moment. I just want to say, like, thank you for having me, really, because I think the more that, even though it's uncomfortable to talk about topics like this, I really appreciate the way that you ask questions. They're very sensitive and thoughtful, and that makes a difference, because I think the more open we feel to share about stories like this, that it won't happen to as many people because it won't be as hidden from us.
I believe the same thing. I mean, if people have more information about all these things, they will be able to notice when something is not right, you know?
Right.
So I'm really happy to have you here and to be able to do this interview. A todos los que nos están mirando nos pueden cambiar de idioma. I changed my language. A todos los que nos están mirando...
Gracias por todo.
A todos los que nos están mirando pueden dar seguir en el botón de suscribir en YouTube, en Instagram, en TikTok o en donde sea. Y voy a dejar las redes de ella. Thank you very much. The next one we're doing in Spanish, okay?
Oh, that's my try. Give me a year and I'll be back. Have a great, great week.
You too.